My name is Andy Lever. I'm the Vice President of International for Hortonworks. I literally flew in a couple of hours ago after a 12-hour flight from London, but I think I've had enough caffeine to keep me going for this presentation, but it's a very full room here today. So let me tell you a little bit about Hortonworks first of all. So we are quite young as a company. We're only 4 years old. We were the original architects of Hadoop, which came from Yahoo. We are now 800 plus employees, and you'll see a slide in a second. We have a very big ecosystem of partners, over 1,500 partners, of which Pivotal is one of our top-tier partners and someone we work with very, very closely. And you'll see that also during my presentation. In terms of our momentum, we've been public for around 1 year. We're listed on the NASDAQ as HDP. And you can see our momentum. We added 152 customers last quarter, and we are growing at roughly 192% in terms of our revenue and billings growth. So that's us. So as I talked about our ecosystem, you can see we have a very vibrant ecosystem around, and when I talk about our architecture around the analytics space, the data space, and very much around the open source space. And I know that's something very core to Pivotal as well. So let me start with where we have a common core with Pivotal. So we started something called the ODP, the Open Data Platform. And this is something that allows people to have a common core of Hadoop with the provisioning graphics side, which is called Apache and Bari, to allow a common core across many different companies within the ecosystem. So as you can see from the diagram here, we've done this to allow you as customers, you as part of the ecosystem, to be able to choose the ODP Hadoop, big data, to allow you to use that across your many investments within your organization. And you can see here some of the founders of ODP, the Open Data Platform, and there are 20 plus different members in there, including, of course, Pivotal and EMC and VMware, other people within the federation. So that's Hadoop as an industry standard. Where do we work together? So, first of all, Hawk is certified on the Hortonworks Data Platform, or ODP. And you can see here on the diagram how the ODP then allows us to work as a core between Hortonworks distribution, Pivotal distribution of Hadoop to make sure that you get interoperability of your existing investments. So you can see we work very closely with Pivotal to make sure that everything that comes from our business model through Hadoop flows through to you as end users, as customers of Pivotal and or Hortonworks. Also here, I won't spend too long. I'll come back to this diagram later. In terms of certifications, you can also see on this diagram, at the lower side, we have the many sources of data. So you as an organization would have data flowing from clickstreams, sensors, web logs, applications, whatever it may be, through to your data systems. And here you can see how we're certified with working with Greenplum, You can see Gemfire, and we already talked a little bit about Hawk, feeding through to your applications. So you can see the Pivotal products and how they interrelate to Hadoop and Hortonworks distribution. So what makes Hortonworks unique? And I think this slide starts that discussion. So we deliver what we call Open Enterprise Hadoop. Now, this is a simplified diagram, but gives you an idea of why we call it Open Enterprise Hadoop. So the lower part of the diagram, open means you have the ability to deploy as you wish. So be it on-premise, cloud, Linux, Windows. You then have the ability to gather together the data, wherever that data is coming from. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. Now, the unique thing that Hortonworks developed early in its history was something called Yarn. And Yarn is the ability to take all of that data, ingest that into Hadoop, and as you see at the top of the diagram, the many ways you can access that data. Batch, interactive, streaming, however you want to do that. And the key is we do all of that in the open source community. So everything that Hortonworks does is pure 100% open source. So one of the things that we've done recently, you can see at the bottom of this diagram here, is the Hortonworks data platform. Hadoop, as you will know it, with the underlying HDFS storage. And I know Internet of Things has been a big topic here today. We have now introduced what we call Hortonworks Data Flow, or Apache NiFi. So, as this diagram says, you can store all your data and have your actionable insights. So all your data is pulled together into Hadoop, stored in one place. With the Internet of Things, or as we call it, the Internet of anything, anything that can produce data, you have perishable insights. Geolocation data coming from cars, connected cars. Sensor data coming from weather stations. Instantaneous streaming data that can come from any device on the very edge or jagged edge of a network, as we call it. So we have customers that will be gathering data from containers, oil rigs, things that enable you to gather data and pull that instantaneously back to your data store. And that's what Apache NiFi does for us. It allows us to have not just data at rest, but data in motion. And those are the two streams of the Hortonworks data platform. So as I said, there are two ways really to achieve Hadoop. When Hadoop first came along, I think people thought the best way to actually speed the development of Hadoop was to develop proprietary extensions. So you can see there are extensions being created to Hadoop which have to be bought and licensed separately. Our model is that we want everything to be in the community. All of our development goes through Apache, all of it is open sourced, everything goes through the community. So let me talk a little bit more about Open Enterprise Hadoop. So as I was saying, everything goes through open source. Why do we do that? Because we think community wins. So if you look at this chart, you can see over time, with a big community, with a huge market that we're in around data, the community will always win and out-innovate proprietary. That's why we've taken that route. It gives you a couple of other benefits. Number one is no vendor lock-in. With open source, it's your choice as to where you want to go in terms of your vendors. You're not locked in. Secondly is, you'll see from our diagram of partners and the fact that we have something called the Open Data Platform, whatever you decide to work with around Hortonworks, you know that it's going to work. That's the premise of the ODP, interoperability. So it's open. Let's talk about a centralized platform. So today there's the premise of what we call the data lake. When I talk to a lot of my customers, they talk about bringing together all of their data into one place to essentially have a 360-degree view of their customer. And I think YARN, and by the way, YARN stands for Yet Another Resource Negotiator, just so you know, allows you to pull together all of your data on one centralized platform and share that across all of your applications. Interoperable. So as we talked about, you need any type of data. And I think on this diagram here, sensor data, if you look at the growth of data now, machine-generated data versus application-generated data are orders of magnitude different. And we see that with our customers as they try to ingest huge amounts of machine-generated data. So any data, any application, so YARN allows you batch, interactive, streaming, machine learning with any deployment model. On-premise, cloud, Linux, Windows. So, three things that we see for enterprise class. First of all, you want centralized operations, your data in one place, managed in one way. Governance, especially in financial services, governance of data. So how do you track data? Who's touched it? Where did it come from? Where is it going? How can you ensure that you have traceability of that data? Governance is a very important topic. And then thirdly, security. We talk about security of encryption for data in motion or data at rest. But also, what's really important is a single security model. I have one way to secure my data in one place, in one time. And these are all the components that ensure you have an enterprise-class Hadoop deployment for big data. So that's why we believe in open enterprise Hadoop. But you can see here, and I think later you'll hear from Yahoo Japan, the way the Apache Software Foundation works, the community innovates, creates new solutions. The committers are the people that really make sure that code is ready to go into the final product from Apache. And this is where we pride ourselves on working with Yahoo. We have nearly half of the committers, so we have a very big influence in terms of the Hadoop roadmap and where it's going. And frankly, that's why a lot of people work with us, because they want to ensure that one, they have the open source enterprise Hadoop, two, they get first-class support and they get a good view of where the roadmap's going, and three, is they want to make sure that they have access to the experts that we have. So just to talk IoT, as we call it, the Internet of Anything. So I think we all know that traditional data models are not keeping up with ingesting unstructured machine-generated data. And we can see here the new data, and I think we can all draw our own curves of that generation of data. And when I talk to my customers, so I've had the privilege of traveling a lot recently and hearing from people like Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar Land Rover, the Port of Rotterdam, Dutch Rail. All of these organizations now rely on machine-generated data. So if I look at someone like Jaguar Land Rover, they're ingesting data around where are my cars, how are they performing, what are they doing. Now, taking that data allows them a 360 view of their customer to do two things. One is personalize the service. When is my service due? What components are worn? How have you been driving the car? But also it means they can feed back to engineering and tell them things they maybe didn't know about the car. For instance, they discovered that in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, a lot of cars sit stationary for 12 hours with the engine running because they want to keep the car cool. Engineering wouldn't have known that without the ability to access that information. So, what does all of this mean? I think a lot of organizations now, with the rise of massive amounts of unstructured data in their organizations, see this as a threat. It's hard to handle. How do I get my arms around it? What do I do with this data? When you look at what people are doing, this is a massive opportunity for your business. And this is a huge competitive differentiator. So you can talk about this in two ways. How do people get started? We call this a data map. So first of all, people like to talk about business outcomes. So what are the typical business outcomes people are looking for? And I've mapped out some typical examples. First of all, data discovery. So I gave you the Jaguar Land Rover example. How are people using my products in different ways to do different things? What have I not thought of? A single view of the customer. I can pull together all of my different forms of data to get a single 360 view of my customer. And then predictive analytics. Everybody talks about predictive analytics, but typically it's rear view analytics rather than forward-looking analytics because we don't have real-time in-motion data. So as I talked about data in motion, the ability now to take that real-time data and blend it with your data at rest gives you predictive analytics. And I'll give you an example in a second. The other side of the coin is cost savings. So a lot of organizations, when I talk to them, ETL offload. I have massive amounts of data on an appliance or on a machine, an engineered system, and I need to get that off there because I'm not getting value from it. Data archive. If you look at financial services with regulation around Basel 2 and 3, HSBC is a customer. You have to keep your data for 7 years and have access to that data with security and governance that sits around that data as well. And data enrichment. Fraud within financial services is a huge use case of data. So fraud prevention and inline fraud are what a lot of the tier 1 banks are doing now with big data. So really, we like to map this out for customers to look at the business outcomes, which gives you the return on the investment, and the cost-saving side, which may be where some people start. But you can see the journey that people get on and the many use cases that they have. So let me give you a couple of examples. I'll do a time check. Actually doing okay. So let me give you one US example to start with, which is Progressive Insurance in the US. So Progressive wanted to get to what's called usage-based insurance. So if anybody's familiar with this term, this is the ability using in-car sensors to take data real-time, either instantly or over a period of time, and actually look at that data to give straight away a risk profile for that driver to see how we could match their premium against the reality of their driving. So what Progressive did was have a device in the car that all gets ingested into Hortonworks. As you can see on the slide, they had 10 billion miles of driving data. So this is not small data, this is genuine big data. And allow them then to actually take the many, many forms of data they have and pull this together as well. So this could be weather data related to how they're driving in certain weather locations. Geolocation data, are they on the freeway or are they on minor roads? Also look at them as a person. How old are they? Are they young? How long have they had their driving license? How many years experience do they have? Bring that all together and look at their claims history to give an instantaneous view of underwriting the risk based on usage. So you can see that Progressive have taken that data real time using real-time analytics to give a view as to how they can serve their customers better within insurance to give them then usage-based insurance, UBI. And we're seeing this a lot across our customers. So we're seeing a lot of swell now within insurance, particularly as insurance companies across many forms of insurance, not just automotive, but other types of insurance, to pull in real-time data to be able to take risk assessments on how they should be underwriting that risk. So you can see here, snapshot and UBI drove 2.6 billion in premiums. So this is a big business. And also, they can build apps on top of this so customers can see their own driving data to correlate that against the premiums that they are being charged. So if you look at the journey, so those data maps that I showed you, in terms of the things that were important to them, you can see the journey they're on in terms of where the data's coming from, the applications they're driving, and the results they want to drive. Give you another example. Cardinal Health. So you can see here, Cardinal Health supply drugs to US hospitals and clinics, but they had very limited visibility into the supply chain. So if you think from production of drug all the way through to the end patient usage, it's very difficult to work out what's happening in terms of prescription and usage and balancing that load within the supply chain. So they launched this new business, Fuse, which allowed them to actually take data within the supply chain. If I actually move this on. Take data within the supply chain and blend that in together with other data to give that common view of a patient. So the patient records, their drugs, what's been prescribed to them, pull that all together to give a view through the supply chain. And you can see the data map here. So I talked about the single patient record, supply chain analytics, cost optimization, public data, prescription archive, to really give them a common view through their supply chain of supply demand of their drugs that they supply to these 60,000 institutions in the US. So a pretty powerful view for Cardinal Health of how they're using that to drive their supply chain. Now, I won't talk too much about this because I think you have Yahoo Japan speaking today, although maybe not directly on their big data program. But I think my previous slide, I talked about the difference between proprietary and open source, the open enterprise Hadoop approach that Hortonworks takes. So Yahoo Japan, we're using a proprietary solution. They are one of the largest users, probably globally, of big data and Hadoop technologies. And our challenge was, how can somebody running at such massive scale, ingesting such massive amounts of data, rely on an open source system? And for them, it was how they scale up, how they ingest this data, how they get a view of all of this data, but they want it in an enterprise class solution. And that involves governance, security, scalability, single view of data, operations, all of the things that you'd expect from a leading solution. And that's the journey we've been on with them. So we're now growing with them in terms of their usage of Hadoop and the storage that the data they're getting from that. But it's enabling them to get more from that data to look at larger parts of their business and how they can leverage that data into other components of their business. So I'm not going to talk on their behalf, but the amount of data that Yahoo Japan are processing is huge. And as I said, when I hear them speak publicly, I think they've just got an amazing story to tell around the volumes of data, and we're very proud as Hortonworks to be a core part of that solution with our data platform. So let me just finish. I've given you a couple of US examples, one here in Japan. As I said, I've been on traveling a lot, and we've just done an Open Enterprise Hadoop roadshow globally. And I get to listen to a lot of customers talking about what they're doing. And I think this data in motion and how data from the edge of networks is very important. So I heard Dutch Rail talk about how all of the time and motion data gets transmitted from their trains in real time back to look at how they optimize the network in terms of movement of their trains and how that happens in real time. They store that data, they can analyze it later, and they can do it data at rest, data in motion with their predictive analytics. I hear about the Port of Rotterdam talking about movement of containers around their ports and onto ships and around the world, and how they optimize the flow of that information from the containers. I talked about Jaguar Land Rover, some of the insights that they get in terms of their cars. The connected cars now can produce in excess of 2.5 gigabytes of data a day. Some of the newer cars, when you hear Jaguar Land Rover talk, have in excess of 2,000 sensors on them, producing data. All of that data gives insights back to not just serving the customer better, but giving engineering insights back into what are people actually doing with our product, how are they driving it, how can we serve them better. And Jaguar Land Rover tell the story they were a very engineering-led company and probably felt that they over-engineered some of the products because they didn't have the right data. And then you hear Daimler, Mercedes-Benz talk about the new C-Class producing over 2.5 gigabytes a day and how they want to be able to do a very personalized service for each customer around their service schedule, and being able to say, we can have variability on all the components in the car for replacement. Saves the manufacturer money, saves the customer money as well. And just to finish, one of our larger customers, HSBC, very large bank, fraud prevention, storage of data, access of data for Basel II were all of the areas they started with. So in the example I gave, ETL offload, storage of data, accessing that data for Basel II, a very quick win. Behind that then was getting a 360 view to do fraud prevention. So the ability to look at the track record and history of customers, to look at things that don't fit within the normal profile, to immediately alert them to something that's not happening on the customer side on the high street, but also within trading rooms as well, where maybe something's not happening the way it normally would do in terms of trading patterns and looking at possible misuse there as well. So you can see across many, many different verticals, insurance, financial, automotive, web-scale properties, huge use of data now. You can see it's happening globally as well. So I've given you examples, US, Europe, Japan, Asia Pacific, and you can see the size of organizations that are using this. When I see people of the scale of Yahoo Japan who are trusting us to manage that business critical operation, you can see from the very, very largest installations on the planet all the way through to people that are just starting out using some of the data mats we talked about in terms of their journey and where they're going as well.